Welcome to Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable discussion where we discuss all things fire service related. Tonight the panel is going to talk about how do you stay current, how do you recertify, how do you maintain certifications, all those sorts of topics revolving around continuing education and in-service training. My name is Pete Lamb. I'm your host for tonight. I'm the author of PeteLamb.com, and I'm the host of the Firefighter Training Podcast. Warren, say hello.
Good evening, folks. Warren Whitley, retired Assistant Chief with Prince William County Fire and Rescue in Virginia, and currently in North Carolina where there's no snow.
All right. Well, that's a good thing. Joe Starnes.
Good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are, and thank you for having me. I'm Joe Starnes. I operate and hang out with Oak Grove Volunteer Fire Department, and also am one of the project managers for Project Kill the Fly Summer.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Ethan, say hello.
Hi, Pete. Ethan Bansek from Lorain, Ohio, student of the trade and founder of Passed On Fire Training.
Good stuff. Thanks for being here, Ethan. And Captain Joe.
Joe Prunesti. Sorry, I had microphone issues. I'm Joe Prunesti with City of Elyria, Ohio Fire Department.
All right. Thanks, Joe. All right. So the question posed to us tonight is how do we stay current? How do we check? Maintain currency? How do we do in-service training? I'll start with you down at the end, Captain Joe. I guess the first question is training mandatory in Ohio? Is it mandatory to have certification in Ohio?
Yes, it is. Every 3 years you have to recertify, and they break it down by the qualifications: inspector, instructor, EMT, firefighter.
So if you were holding multiple, you have to recertify in each of those, or would it be staggered?
Yes. No, each one is up on your birthday. In Ohio, every 3 years, on your birthday, you expire.
Okay, so let's ask the question. So a 20-year veteran has to recertify firefighter 1 and 2 at assuming there probably wasn't even certification back then, but you know what I'm saying, an experience.
Yes.
Fire. What's the penalty for that, Joe? If he doesn't, is it loss of employment?
If you miss past your birthday and you expire, they give you, I believe it's 30 days, and then if you do not, then you have to go back to the fire academy, and you either, I believe it's another 30 days you can take the exam, firefighter 1 and 2 exam, but then after 60 days, if you're still expired, then you got to go through the fire academy. And we've had, not in my department, but I teach at a fire academy nearby, and we have had firefighters with 20 years on go through the fire academy with young brand new students because they let their card expire.
Wow, that's an interesting process. Joe, what's going on in your world in North Carolina? Is training mandatory, and is there recertification for fire certs? We know there's some medical certs. We'll get into that in a minute. I'm sure that's all current. But is it mandatory? Is there mandatory firefighter training?
North Carolina is mandatory continuing education.
Hey, Joe, you got to pick that audio up one more time.
Let's do this. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little better.
There's a mandatory continuing education process in North Carolina. All that's under penalty of their insurance rating for the fire district and volunteer system. So, for instance, if we cannot document and show training of certain types for that year, and that certification could be lost, or you could get a lower fire insurance rating. That's the big punch of the competency side of the model.
All right. Now, when you say insurance rating, are you talking about something in North Carolina, or are you referring to ISO?
It is the ISO implementation in North Carolina.
Okay, it's the way North Carolina implements ISO. Okay, okay, good. Warren, what's the deal? Tell me your background. Is training mandatory, and what's the recertification process, at least on the fire side?
Well, back in Virginia, it was left up to the jurisdiction as far as what training was required to ride the apparatus. At the state level, it used to be you had 5 years before you had to recertify if you didn't move up. So if you were a firefighter 1 and 2, you got officer 1 that would, or instructor 1 would reset your clock. But I think about 10 years ago, the fire board up there threw that requirement out. So there's no requirement for continuing ed or research in Virginia.
Okay, interesting. And so I'll speak, Charlie joined us, I'll speak for Mass and Rhode Island. There is no mandatory training requirement. Many collective bargaining agreements, many labor contracts require you to be certified or what have you. And at present, the only one in Mass, I believe, that is recertifying is incident safety officer. None of the other levels of certification are recertifying. So you get certified, if you will, and you don't ever have to do it again. So no, I'm not passing a comment on that system right at the moment. I will in a few minutes, but that certainly is an issue. And Charlie, you've got, in addition to certification stuff, you've got other issues with airport regulations, right?
Well, hi everybody. Sorry I was a little late getting in. I had some problems getting on. Our certification requirements, our training requirements, and our recertification requirements are all federally mandated by the Federal Aeronautics Administration. They set down a list of guidelines with which we have to comply in order to remain as firefighters for the airport. The airport certification license is based upon the Federal Aviation Administration coming in annually and testing us on our abilities to perform and our competencies. We have 12 competencies that we must remain current in and be certified in a minimum of once annually. In our department, we require those certifications to be done every 6 months. I am in charge of that, and I delegate the responsibilities to the captains of the 4 working groups. They take them in the form of a company drill, if you will, to do the same required trainings twice a year, 6 months, year in, year out, year in, year out. We get kind of old. The captains have, after being passed along by me, the captains have the parameters and the guidelines that they have to go by, and I encourage them to try to liven the training up and to try to make it a little different each time, so it'll be a little more palatable and interesting to everybody. But the bottom line is this: if we don't recertify, and I can't produce records every April when the FAA comes in. For instance, if I have an individual that hasn't had a minimum of 2 live fires per annum, that individual is taken off of riding status. If the individual is taking off of riding status, the airport's not going to pay him just to come to work and sit and watch TV. So, lesson learned. It is up to me to make sure that everybody stays current to the best of my ability. I do that. There is the odd time when either extended sick leave and/or illness and/or on-the-job injury has precluded an individual from maintaining the certification. When that person comes back to work, it's my responsibility solely to make sure that they get certified as quickly as possible, and I try to do that in a minimum amount of time. It is the crux of what we do, maintaining certifications. You have to come into the job, minimum of firefighter level 2, EMT basic, and have a valid maintain airfield driver's license, which is not the same as a state or local driver's license. It's a whole different thing. We have to take a driving test. We have to recertify and get our licenses renewed every year. Everything is done by Annum, and again, no, I don't want to go on too long, but we maintain our certification every 6 months. So every 6 months, I produce records that say that every person in the department, myself included, has certified in the 12 required categories, and I have to produce those records and also show competency that they inspect us when they come in April.
All right, so conflict that, Charlie, with your career as a chief in a city department. So when you were on the job as chief in the department, you didn't have any such requirements, right? Is that the case?
That's correct. There were no mandates per se. No. The stock answer to that is no. There weren't. You know,
All right.
I can't put lipstick on that pig, Pete.
No, that's right. No, and I think that's where we are in some cases. You got a 20-year firefighter riding on the truck next to a paramedic, and in many cases, the paramedic has stricter recertification requirements than that firefighter does, I would say. Warren, you had a kind of a comment on that. You want to talk about that, the EMS side versus the fire side?
Well, if you look at the big umbrella of a profession, and I'll pull the pin on another grenade and throw it out there, that the fire service truly is not a profession by sociological standards. On the EMS side, they actually have licensing where each individual in most states has to be licensed and certified, and they're also working under the license of the medical director. And you can see from the wide variety of what we talked about on the fire side in our various jurisdictions and states, we don't have anything close to being licensed. We're working under somebody else's license to do our job.
Right, exactly. And there's a level of liability, responsibility. There's a lot that goes with that we don't have. So a question came up in the panel. So is it possible that in Mass or Rhode Island today, and I'll bounce this off of Charlie, is it possible in Mass or Rhode Island today that you have a firefighter who is not certified to any level and may have only had on-the-job training? Charlie?
Well, the two departments that I was involved in when I was the assistant chief in Cranston and then the chief of department here in my hometown of West Warwick, the firefighters graduated from their respective academies certified at state firefighter level 2. And that was their certification. At no point were they required to recertify in any of the areas. So as I think you said in the beginning, Pete, once you got certified, you stayed certified. So they graduate from their respective academies at firefighter level 2, and then with depending upon various collective bargaining agreements, you may or may not need to be 1021 certified to take a lieutenant's test, or 1041 certified to transfer to the training division, and on and on and on.
Right. So, and to answer one of the questions of the panel is, from the volunteer standpoint, there may be no rules. And so, yeah, that's absolutely possible to be true today. Certainly it's not recommended, obviously, but that is possible today. Christine's talking a little bit about the medical side. Let's hear from her and see what she's talking about. So certified first responder every 2 to 3 years, EMTs on a 5-year card cycle, and then go back 3 years for recertification. Continuing ed for volunteer EMTs is free through the New Jersey EMT Fund. Firefighter 1 training also provides core CEUs for EMT. Now, that raises an interesting conversation. Thank you for that, Christine. So the question is, what is the pay? What is the pay to be recertified? What's the cost to being recertified? What's the cost of an initial training? Captain Joe, you were talking about training at the academy. Does it cost anything to go to the academy in any way, shape, or form? How does that work in your world?
Well, if you're, let's say you're me and you need your what we call CEs, the department will pay for any online training that you do. As far as the academy for those firefighters that I've had that have had to go through the whole, it's 260 hours for a firefighter in Ohio, I believe, that they go on the city's dime, but they have to pass or they're fired. So it's a combination of things. If you're current and you're getting your continuing ed throughout your 3 years, most cities pay for the training. But you got to go back to the fire academy. Yeah, they'll pay for that, but it's basically if you fail, the cities that I've had in there with fire.
Joe, any idea on cost? He may have locked up, I think. I'm not sure. Ethan, we didn't talk to you. What's going on? What do you see in terms of continuing ed and requirements for training? Do you have any comments on that?
No, just going off what Captain Joe said, it's same thing. We're in Ohio here.
Okay. Okay. Sometimes in Mass, it's an interesting situation. You are hired by the department before you're sent to the academy. So you're actually being paid while you're in the academy. The issue to that obviously becomes with a training injury. A training injury is a line of duty injury, subject to disability and all those sorts of things that come with that. So that can certainly be there. There is no actual cost for training. There is cost to the city, obviously, transportation, send the person, but all fire training in Massachusetts is free. So that's a tremendous thing. You got to buy your books and so forth, but all fire training is free. It's kind of a unique situation. I'm going to make a mistake when I say this, but it's 1/4% of everyone's insurance premiums pays for fire academy training. So your homeowner's fire insurance premium, 1/4% of that actually goes forward and pays fire training. Thank God for Ben Franklin, right? The guy who started the first fire department, started the first insurance company. So he had a good deal going there for sure. Joe, what about cost of training for volunteers in North Carolina?
In North Carolina, the community college system delivers the training for the North Carolina Fire Commission, and that training is paid for by the commission to the colleges, so they get FTEs to get paid for it. So to the student just has a transportation cost and sometimes some logistical costs with books, but other than that, it's similar to what you just said about the academy. And then
Nice.
The cities, for the most part, run their own. The metro areas run their own academies, and their folks come out of their academies meeting the state certification, minimum standards, and plus some more, and to get the certification. So the specialty certifications, firefighter 1 and 2, rescue technicians, and all that is managed by the North Carolina Fire Commission. They set those standards.
Okay, see, our standards are separated. Our local state Department of Health handles the whole EMS side of the house, and on the fire side, that would be the State Fire Academy or whatever.
Chief, and I was speaking of the fire side, not the EMS side. No.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misheard there. So if Brian Williams can misremember, I can mishear. You know what I mean? I think it's at least fair to be able to do that. So
you can get a helicopter ride confused.
I'm not going to go down that path, but all right. So what do we do about in-service training? What are we doing in the departments to do that? Charlie, you had a pretty rigorous schedule of FAA requirements or whatever. What takes place on a routine day in terms of training? How is that managed, the in-service, keeping us sharp on our skills every day? What do you do, Charlie?
Okay, the first thing every Monday when I go on duty at 7 o'clock. First thing I do when I go in at 7 a.m., I post the week's training on the board in the captain's office. Each working group has a minimum of 2 trainings that they've got to accomplish, one in each of their 24-hour periods. The length of the trainings will vary in direct ratio to the subject matter and the category that is assigned to them for that week. And I'll pull one out of my hat. Category 3 is firefighter and personnel safety and competencies. That has 3 separate components to it that have to be accomplished within that week's time by the working groups. That the total hours involved in that are approximately 7, if my memory serves. And my memory doesn't always serve. But the approximate hours to accomplish that is 7. It's divided into 3 separate components. So usually it's done in 3 2-hour and change working blocks, and that's done sometime during the duty 24 hours. For obvious reason, it would be obvious reasons it's preferred that it be done during daylight hours. I like to be there to see what's going on. Every now and then I'll dip my toe in the water with the guys and train along with them. But I leave the training to, again, at the company drill level to the captains, and they handle it with their personnel. So they have an assignment each week, and it's broken up into 2, as I said, 2 6-month segments. And by the time we get to around the middle of November for the first, the middle of May for the first training cycle. Training cycles run from January to June, and then July to December. By the time we'll get to the middle of May, I would expect and require that the personnel and all working groups pretty much have everything buttoned up, and then we do the catch-ups. We call them make-ups. Any individual's been out sick, long-term injury, of access to live fire training, live fire areas, and so forth. So there is a flexibility in the component, but the requirements are pretty rigid, and everybody knows what they are, and they've all bought into the system, and it's it's been a collective success. I'm proud of the guys and the work that they do, and the efforts that they put into it. They do a good job with it, and it's ongoing, and it's going to keep going, until someone takes my place and maybe comes up with a better system, and I'm sure there's a better one out there. But the system we have in place right now takes care of the FAA requirements, meets all our certifications, and keeps everybody current, with the exception of EMS. That's a whole separate component we can talk about, at another juncture.
All right, good. So we're going to talk about that because you triggered a couple of thoughts in my head, and I want to revisit that. Let's go back out to Christine, who's got another comment, and talking about EMT recert. Elective CEUs can be chosen from a wide variety of classes: carbon monoxide, rescue technician, hazmat ops for EMS personnel. And so, now we're starting to talk about things like you can still maintain your certification while taking different electives, right? So are we getting it? There is continuing ed that meets certifications. There are people, if Warren's going to be the only guy throwing grenades, I should at least join him, right? There are people that are pencil whipping training every day in America. There are people that are writing down 2 hours of training and may or may not be achieving any real life objective. They can check off the box that I met that certification, but is it showing in performance? Is 2 hours of training enough in a day? And I understand responses cut into that. I'm a realist. I understand that completely. But is that what's going on? Captain Joe, I think you're back with us. I'm not seeing video, but give it a shot. What's going on a daily training basis in your organization?
Well, it's pretty much up to the captain that's on duty or the shift commander. We have a training officer, but we find that in our department, as in most departments, that okay, let's say A shift has trouble stretching 1 3/4 inches, but B shift is okay with that, but they can't handle a duck gun quite as well. And so A shift will drill on stretch 1 3/4, and B shift will handle deck guns. And so it's basically on what that shift needs. We'll have an organized training every once a month on something dictated from the department level. But for the most part, and I kind of like this, is they leave it up to the shift and the shift commander to decide, because he knows best what his shift needs to work on. And I kind of like it that way. But everything is documented. You have to fill out a sheet, check the boxes like you said, but it goes into our same software that we do our fire reports and incident reports on, and so you instantly have a pretty good data to retrieve as far as each firefighter's training.
And who actually conducts the training? You said that the topic may be left up to the shift commander. Who's actually conducting it, Joe?
Well, on my shift, I usually do it for the most part. Each shift is different. We do have a training officer who works 40 hours. He pretty much organizes it, and then we have certified instructors throughout the department that he can say, hey, Mike, on C shift, I need you to do hose. And then he'll put together a class on stretch and hose lines for all 3 shifts, PowerPoint or whatever. So pretty much the certified instructors on my department or the shift commander himself.
Okay, Ethan, what are you hearing as you poke around? What is a typical training on a day shift or a volunteer training? How many hours of training is volunteers getting in a night? What do you hear as you poke around?
Well, certainly the more hours of training, the better. But like you said, there's only so many hours in a day, and with responses and with everything else that you have, there is a point in time where...
I'm sorry he feels that way. He went away on me. Ethan just fell out of the panel there for a second, so we'll have to get that response back. Joe, what do you do on the volunteer side for how many hours a week, how many hours a month? How does that work in the volunteer side, and how is it delivered?
Well, the least rating you can get and maintain an insurance rating is what North Carolina calls a 9S. That 9S requires 36 hours of continuing ed a year. Some of that has to be at the academy. I think 12 hours of that has to be at the academy. So from the standpoint of it can be anything. You can count any kind of skill, literally, towards it. A lot of it depends on the department's focus and what they do. Oak Grove has 2 nights a month designated as training nights, and then they have special training nights. They do a lot of times they might do a company drill, or Chief Davis has quite a few acquired structure burns. So that's kind of how the world I live in operates.
So the minimum would be 3 hours a month, but most departments probably do a little more than that. They may do a couple of meeting nights a month.
Yeah, and what happens is when you drop your 9 down to, a lot of the departments in Cleveland County where I live have 6 ratings, 5 and 6 ratings as volunteers, and a lot of that effort is certainly on water flow and rural water flow. But other things count also. In other words, staffing minimum, staffings on calls, all counts towards that rating. You know it better than me probably, but at the end of the day, the training is the reason that it makes a difference is that requires mutual aid training and company level trainings across fire departments, which I think it's one good aspect of what they've done with that. So I'm a big believer in company level training for volunteers, and because a lot of it really is that 5.5-inch thick skill book, and if they get some form of skill training, somebody goes and cleans an air pack and puts it back on the apparatus, they get a stroke on their air pack sheet. That's not quite air pack training. So it has a lot of holes in it, but in the same breath, it's better than it used to be. It's not as archaic as it used to be.
Right, right. Warren, what went on in your world in terms of in-service training, on the job, in service? How did it get organized? Who did it? What was the deal there?
Well, generally the training division would have an overall plan for the year, and then the company officers, through their battalion chief, would figure out how to deliver it. So there was some standardized stuff, and there was an awful lot of stuff that the stations were expected to do on their own. Typically, it was at least one EMS drill, one fire drill, and a street drill every shift. So, or in some cases, that shift was a week because some of the stations were daytime only staffing. And most of them, by and large, at least when I was a battalion chief, they went far exceeded the minimums, especially the slow stations. If you didn't go out and train, you were going to be bored. So that's how they worked. The battalion chiefs would set the minimums for their stations and work it from there.
Excellent, excellent. So yeah, we've got another comment from the audience here. Big Yak SD, great name. I love the screen name. What about OSHA 1910-134 annual SCBA training and fit testing? Absolutely. I'm hoping that most people are doing that. I'm certainly hoping that. There was a time when you looked at NIOSH reports, line of duty death reports, that SCBA, lack of SCBA policy, lack of SCBA maintenance, lack of SCBA training, a lot of that stuff was coming up on a regular basis. Some states, I don't know where you're from, you may want to answer that, but, you know, are you an OSHA state? And even if you are not an OSHA state, you can find an applicable standard in 1500 referring to OSHA 1910, certainly. I had a theory, I don't know if it was right or wrong, but we had to document that every member would use and breathe down a cylinder each 30-day period. So what we did was, you know, if you caught a fire, well, then we checked you off that you used an SCBA. But in a small department, you can actually have people who don't use an SCBA for 2 months, 3 months, or what have you. So I'm a big proponent of SCBA testing. On the fire ground, I'm not sure there are many things more important than your next breath of air. We can talk about fire behavior, we can talk about hose lines, nozzle types, we can talk about anything else. But if you are failing on your next breath of air, that's a big deal. Captain Joe, you kind of had a comment in the chat room there. So, you know, we're doing this training. Are we doing it right? Are there bad examples? Are there bad things out there? Are we doing it correctly?
Well, my point was this, and I'll give a great example, is that there is a wonderful training program called the Nozzle Forward. And basically this firefighter from Seattle, he does an excellent job in describing moving the hose line and moving 2.5. But the snippets that are on YouTube or on videos, it is one type of training that if you don't physically go to his class and you try to piece together via YouTube, you're not going to grasp what he's trying to teach, and you could get guys hurt. So there are some things, and I think a lot of also some of the fire behavior, some of the studies in fire behavior, you know, everybody's going to cherry pick what they want, and they're going to tell their guys, and their members who may not be as into the job as all of us are only going to get pieces parts, and that doesn't do anybody any good, in my opinion.
Yeah, you know, I'm a big proponent of online training, obviously. I guess that's a form of what we're actually doing here tonight is online training to some degree as we're having those discussions. But if you watch YouTube and there is not some direction or there is not some somebody to coach the process through or to give some guidance, there may be troubles. There may be troubles. I don't disagree with that. I think that there are plenty of negative examples for us to see. Let me be the skunk at the lawn party. So we heard some career departments say that, you know, you're training a couple hours a day, and we were in that category. We would pretty consistently have 2 hours a day. It was hands-on, people throwing ladders, people doing stuff. Things were getting done. I was pretty pleased about that, and that occurred long before I got there. That was not something I inherited it. I didn't take credit for it, but we did that pretty well. So I guess my question is, we're practicing 2 hours a day. How much practice does a professional athlete do a day in terms of what they do? I don't know. Is 2 hours a day okay, or you're holding up your hands more? And what is it? Probably like 8 or 10 hours, right? You're muted.
Yes, I am.
Speechless.
Think
You
about those professional athletes. That's their job. So 8, 10, 12 hours a day is the norm for them.
All right. And so it's our job, though, isn't it? Right? We say, being an athlete is their job, so therefore they practice that much. Well,
how many people argue that being a firefighter is the same as being an athlete?
Right.
So I think we're probably behind the curve a bit, and not just on the classroom and pulling hose parts.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's the whole physical thing as well, whether we're able to do it or not. So, I don't know. Is 2 hours a day okay? Joe talked about volunteer departments, and some of my experience has been this. Volunteer departments will meet once a week, and they will do 3 meetings that are trainings, and 1 meeting will be an organizational, social side meeting or what have you. So they're probably getting, 6 to 12 hours of training a month. Is that okay? I don't know. Jolly, you've been quiet for a minute. What do you think? Is 2 hours? Are we doing it right? I mean, is that what we need to do? Can we do it better?
We can always do better. If you think you're getting it right, or you think that's the best you can do, then you're not trying hard enough. There's always ways to improve. Again, our situation is much different than most people's jobs are hanging on the balance. If someone can't show competency, they are sent to remedial training. They're taken off of riding status, and if they can't regain their certification and competencies, they're separated. And yeah, this is a union department, and the union is in agreement with this. They helped write the standard for the as far as that goes locally. I wrote in the chat room that we're required to show actual competency during our live fire trainings with SCBA. We also have a fit test every March. Sometimes I wonder if there isn't more that can be done. Personally, I would like to see us go to 4 live fires a year, but I'm kind of a nudge when it comes to that. The 2 live fire trainings are the most important segments to me of the trainings that we do annually, and everybody takes them very seriously. During those live fires, we are also required to show a physical fitness component or competency, if you will, with the climbing of ladders, entering an aircraft over the wing, moving an exit door, hose lines down the center of the aircraft, and so forth. It's physically demanding, and we had quite a brouhaha over the physical fitness standard, and it was the agreement we all came to was everybody has to do all the live fire components in order to pass their physical. It's part of their physical fitness standard as well. So, are we doing it right? Well, it's working for us. Could it be better? It could always be better. I would say on the average, and I'm not going to try to put lipstick on the pig. There are days, particularly on weekends, I'm sure that nothing's done. And then on there are other days when the guys are at it for 5, 6, 7 hours. So to me, it all comes out in the wash. And if I can produce documentation, and I can witness competency, which is something I insist on. Your pencil whip comment, Pete, came to mind, and I've seen it before. I refuse to take part in it. It's a very real situation where if you're saying somebody's competent and they're not, and they hurt or kill themselves or somebody else because of that lack of competency, then then it's your hindquarters are up the flagpole, and I don't care to be in that position. What I really don't care to do is be in the position where somebody does get hurt or killed because they weren't competent. That's the most important thing for me, maintaining that competency so they can keep themselves and others safe. So again, I think what we're doing is right for us. Is it right for everybody? Of course not, because our mission is different. But all of that said, we're always looking for ways to improve.
Right, right. Couple of Joe, I'm going to get to your screen share in just a second. This is a great comment from Johnny. Thanks, Johnny. I appreciate you every week when you're out there. Nice to have you in here. We're going to drag you onto the panel one of these days, Johnny. That's it. I'm going to just drag you kicking and screaming onto the panel. He points out very, very well that Malcolm Gladwell in his book outlines says that it takes 10,000 hours to reach mastery. So you figure that out and figure out how long we're doing. Are we mastering our craft, or are we just getting by? And that's the real deal. That's kind of where I wanted to go tonight. I think we all have training records that say what happens. I think we all have fires and after action reports that say what might have gone differently. But I wonder if we're doing it right, and that's what I'm thinking. Joe Starnes, I'm going to bring you up as a screen share. So what are you sharing with us, and give us the audio that goes with this.
Well, I took a little bit of time and ran over to the NFPA site to look at the firefighter injury report. I think what we have in the way of this discussion is, are we as a profession taking care of our people, and secondly, do we deliver a service that that is necessary for the customer? I think we will be increasingly have pressure applied to us in almost innumerable ways of doing what we're talking about tonight. I think we get a choice of leading it or being pushed into it, and so I think injuries. Yeah, the article you sent me today, Chief, is a great article that says this. What at some point someone's going to say that was not so smart. We weren't prepared. You knew better and you didn't. All those are negligent statements, and I think the front end screening for the job is going to change. I think the standard of care is going to change for the firefighter organization, and so I just think it's coming. I think it's here, and I think the chart I put up is simply going to drive that. What it says that 29,760 vault firefighter injuries occurred during fireground operations. That was of the 65,000, so 30,000 off the 65. 40-something% of them were on the fireground. Strains, sprains, muscular pains were the most, and it doesn't include anything that comes latency, later cancer, and all the other things that come with the job. So those numbers are really misleading. What I'm saying, they're conservative, and I really believe they're worse than they look. So I think we're going to be forced to do the conversation we're having here tonight. I think we're either going to get to walk there with our own accord, or we're going to get somebody's going to hook to us and drag us there. So.
Right. No, well said. Joe referenced the article I put out. There was an article circulating today about the training fatality in Canada. I don't think it's really a point to talk about tonight. It's pretty fresh, but there was a incident where a firefighter in training in a water rescue, ice rescue situation was just lost his life in a training exercise, and there were a lot of comments about how is it regulated, who's checking, who's doing whatever. So Charlie had this comment about, he's got pretty strict FAA regulations, which says what's happened. Quite frankly, Charlie, I could tell you from the mass side of the house, certifications did not expire, so there is no question if it lapses. That's not even an issue, and so you would have to you would have to go back to the time of hiring or what the collective bargaining agreement says. I think Warren also pointed out that there is no expiration per se in Virginia when he was there, at least. Is that right, Warren? There is no expiration. So he's in the same place. So they're not there. And so let's throw that question to Captain Joe. Captain Joe, if somebody actually lapses, well, he pointed it out, Charlie, just before you got in. Joe, I'll let you recap that. You said at 30 days something happens, 60 days something happens. You want to just recount that for Charlie, please?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure the exact time frame, but it's pretty quick. That in Ohio, that once you lapse, you have a X amount of time to either retest by taking the state's firefighter 1 or 2 class test. If you then you have to go back to the fire and go back to 1 or 2 fire academy. So you either can lapse, take an exam, get your card back, or if you miss that deadline, then you got to go to a fire academy and take the 240 hours academy all over again.
Right, and then I assume that there's some provision if you don't make it, you're subject to termination or some disciplinary action.
You're done.
You're done.
You can't hold a card. If you don't have a card in Ohio, you're not a firefighter.
Right. Okay. So there you go. I know Florida has a very similar certification standard where you're almost licensed, if you will, and I think that's kind of what Joe's given us there. So what else? What else do we have to talk about on this this panel? What's left? Where do we go from here? Anybody?
Well, I think the one thing is that we're talking certifications, but I think it always goes back to, are you as a firefighter or a fire officer, are you prepared? Are you certifying? I don't want to, are you working towards a card, or are you trying to certify yourself to be the best firefighter that you can be? And we talked about, NFL players and how they practice. Well, every team in the NFL has 2 or 3 quarterbacks, but how many are the Tom Brady's or the Peyton Mannings? Are you willing to be like that, or are you satisfied in sitting back and just going day to day?
Yeah, I think your personal motivation is important. If any of you, shameless plug, right? It's always time for a Pete shameless plug. Today's podcast episode was actually by Lieutenant Mike Daly, and his comment was, "Are you good enough?" And it was really kind of neat. It was kind of a conversation that sprung out with his young son on the way to practice. And it's, are you good enough? And you know what? I just think that question that Joe just posed is, are you? Yeah, I got 10 certifications and more degrees than a thermometer, and I'm EFO and CFO and all those kinds of things that I am. And if that's what you're doing is resume building, that still doesn't make you an effective guy or gal out in the street sometimes. So I think that's a question as well. Charlie, you had a question. Did you have one remaining question? We got time for probably one more. So is there something else that needs to come up?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out to the panel, what requirements, if any, people need to have to take a promotional exam?
Yeah, okay, that's a fair question. Captain Joe, how much time and grade, and is there any requirement before you take a lieutenant's exam?
In my city, you have to have 5 years from a firefighter to take lieutenants, and then 2 years from lieutenant to captain, captain to assistant chief, and assistant chief to chief in my department. So, but once you get promoted, that's it. You just keep your certs up. There's no other training.
Any required certs in addition to time, Captain Joe?
No. Okay. Take the test. That's all you do. Written exam.
All right. Joe Stearns, is there any requirements, are there any prerequisites to becoming an officer, or are your officers elected by the members? How does that work in the volley side?
It works different by the jurisdiction. In our system, they have to have a certain amount of seniority. They have to have a certain amount of training. They have to be certified in certain areas more than just firefighter training. So for them, and then the only officers elected at Oak Grove are uh, the the chiefs, and then after that, all the chiefs appoint their officers there, and they can be unappointed as well.
Yeah.
And so but they have to have certain time and grades, certain certifications, fire and for them to have the job. And then if they have like fire officer training, they have so long to get it and that kind of thing.
Right, right. Warren, what was the promotional process like for you in terms of time and any certs required?
Well, when I left, it was 2 years between each grade, so firefighter to technician 2, which was your driver and stand-in officer. Then 2 years after that for lieutenant and so on. In our county, we actually had a uniform rank structure that covered the volunteers and the career staff. So based on the level, they were generally appointed or elected on the volunteer side, but let's say to be a lieutenant, you still had to have instructor 1 and officer 1. For the career staff, same. The addition the career staff has had introduced in the last 3 or 4 years is a thing called LAP. So they had LAP 1 through 4, and I forget what it stands for. It's leadership something or other program. So Tech 2 would take LAP 1 to help prepare him to become a lieutenant, in addition to Officer 1 and Instructor 1. And lieutenants would take LAP 2 to prepare to be a captain. Captains took LAP 3 to prepare to be a battalion chief and so on. So they were doing some additional stuff on the career side, plus the normal promotional exam processes, which were generally assessment centers. So it was pretty rigorous.
Right, right. Here's one that you talk about things we forget about, right? Thank you, Lane, for being with us today. So Lane is out in California, out in Southern California, and he's saying there's no requirements for recert on the structural side of the job, but on wildland, there's lots of reoccurring training we do, and certs for wildland training do expire. And I was aware of that. I wasn't even thinking about the wildland side. So there's a case where their firefighters are structural. He's in a very urban city department, a very large city department, as battalion chief. And so on the structural side of the house, it doesn't kick in, but on the wildland side it does. So that's an interesting change. So a couple things. I mean, we've had a good discussion here tonight. I think we found a hole. Right? So we're saying that, Charlie's got regulations from FAA, and he's aircraft firefighting on an airport. We've got Lane with some wildland stuff. We've got Christine, who brought up the EMS side and the paramedical side and all that. They all have more stringent rules than we do. And so to Warren's comment about becoming a profession and being professionals, is there something we should be doing a little different? Anybody got any solutions as we begin to summarize? We're pretty good. We're awesome about problems. This is not a problem-solving panel. This is a problem-presenting panel. But it's good dialogue. It's good discussion. Anybody got any thoughts? So based on the conversation we've had and based on my little summary statement, it seems like the EMS side's doing it a little better. Seems like forestry's doing it a little better. Seems like specialty feels, hey, listen, we didn't even get into it. Hazmat is a big deal, right? You got to have hazmat physicals. We didn't even go down that path. But hazmat is its own animal as well. What could we be doing better? Anybody want to jump on that?
Well, I think two things real quick. You talked about hazmat and EMS. The difference there is federal money is pretty easy to get for hazmat for training, and I think that's why those certs are. My biggest thing is that I think I mentioned real in the chat is that you look at all the social issues that are happening in America. Police departments are front and center with, what has happened in Ferguson and so on. But when we burn a block down, or we, kill a firefighter, we don't go through the same scrutiny. We do with our reports and NIOSH, but they're all internal. The citizenry really is more concerned about our salaries rather than are we trained.
Yeah,
Point blank, honest.
yeah, I think so. I got to tell you, we're not far off. And in that article I shared with Joe Steins today, is somebody is actually questioning why someone died in training. That happens to be a Canadian example, but I have to tell you, we're not far from a fire officer in the U.S. going to jail, or at least being brought up on charges. I know it's been done on the wildland side. I know they charged an incident commander out there. I don't know what the outcome of that was. I'll have to check with my trusty research assistant, Ethan, on that. But I know that a wildland fire officer has happened. Yeah, and as Warren points out, in Europe it is not uncommon at all to have that happen. So I think that there are some things to be said. I guess I would leave it with this. Training is a key. You cannot train enough. If you think you did enough training today, do another hour, do a little bit more, do something a little different to make your job a little bit better. I think training is paramount, and I think it's the foundation for what we do. So, and you're right. Whether it's good training or valid training, it's got to be something that is, it relates, it works, and it is good training. I think that's a good term. Thank you for that, Warren. So with that, we will see you next week on Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable. Please go over and check our archives at firefightingtoday.com. You can see all the past shows there, and check out what we're doing. Thanks, and be safe. We'll talk to you next week.